Hello, and welcome to another episode of Ask a Pianist. My name is Andrew Aarons, and today we're going to continue our look at contemporary music, specifically with regards to how we can learn to perceive aesthetic choices that composers make that may be unfamiliar or downright confusing to a listener. I'll be honest with you, there are definite expectations made of an audience member who is about to hear a piece of contemporary music. The expectation can be as basic as the audience member should be familiar with Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, or it can be as complex as the audience member should understand sonata form well enough to hear how this modern composer is going to mess with it. Last season, we looked at one of the most basic concepts that we have to be aware of when listening to modern music, a lack of stable tonality, or potentially a lack of tonality entirely. When we stretch the boundaries of tonality, we eventually break through to a point where the key of a piece has no meaning. It can be anything, and therefore it means nothing. That is one vector that is pushed to its limit, harmony. Now we're going to consider another vector that modern composers enjoy pushing to the limit, rhythm. What am I talking about? Well, think about it. The majority of classical works written before 1900 employ a steady pulse. The rhythm serves as a framework upon which the harmony and the melody are structured, and in general, if a piece establishes a beat pattern, the only rhythmic variation we'll find involves subdivisions of this already established beat. A piece written in common time, 4 quarter beats to a bar, may have divisions into 16th notes, 32nd notes, triplets, etc., but we'll still be able to identify 4 equal beats to a bar. Furthermore, changes in beat patterns usually occur at strategically important structural points. When you encounter a change to a new section in a piece, a composer may switch from 4 basic beats to 3, and the subdivisions will then be written within those 3 equal beats. But you'll rarely find a composer suddenly switching from 4 beats to 3 within a section, or localized for a bar or 2 before switching back. Similarly, it's just as rare, if not more so, to have 2 entirely different beat patterns in separate hands playing together. You won't have 7 beats to a bar in the left hand and 4 to a bar in the right. The 2 hands are most, if not always, unified by the basic beat pattern of the bar, always playing together. This makes sense. The priorities before 1900 in terms of musical expression resided in the melody and the harmony equation. And although beats were regularly divided into smaller, less regular components, rhythmic complexity was nowhere near the development that was achieved with harmonic complexity. No matter what we were listening to, rhythm was regular and predictable enough that our attention could be free to focus on the complexity of the harmonic language or the perception of long-term structure. So, what happens when we remove rhythmic predictability? Well, this. Can't find the beat pattern? I don't blame you. In this piece, there are competing pulses which change on a beat-to-beat basis, occasionally phasing into a regular pulse for a few beats, only to dissolve into a different rhythm as soon as we think we're comfortable. At the beginning of the piece, we have continuous 16th notes. Then, Ligeti asks us to highlight rhythmically the first note of each bar for the next 4 bars, setting up a potential regular rhythm. So far, the listener is doing fine. Then, Ligeti starts to push us out of this comfort zone. The next bar is subdivided into 2, which is still within the realm of reason for the casual listener. But after this, Ligeti goes off the rails for the rest of the piece. Before we get to that, have a listen to this opening once again. Notice how Ligeti starts the continuous notes without a rhythmic pulse. Then, he introduces a pulse and subdivides it in a regular, predictable way. Easy to follow, in other words. Now, I'll play this opening again, but I'll continue on. Ligeti continues to make each subdivision smaller and smaller until he separates the hands and has them playing different rhythms entirely. What just happened? When Ligeti subdivides the bar into 2 equal parts, he's really just creating groups of 16th notes. In this case, 2 equal groups of 6 16th notes. The next bar has 2 equal groups of only 5 16th notes. Groups of 5 notes are very difficult for pianists to deal with, as it is extremely rare in classical music. The instinct is to feel it as a group of 6 notes with 1 missing, which leads to an incorrect rhythm. A proper 5 simply continues, but feels off-kilter. In this etude, Ligeti points this out to the pianist through the construction of the gesture. The groups of 6 16th notes feel balanced in the hand. Notice the rocking motion. The thumb always leads to the next important note. But the groups of 5 16th notes in the bar after feel unbalanced, as if a note is missing. The thumb no longer leads to the next important note. It's the pinky this time. This is a kind of physical confusion that we must deal with in this piece regarding the rhythm. This opening shows us the first main point that Ligeti is trying to make with this etude. He's saying to us, rhythm is pliable and malleable, and a group of 5 is just as equal as a group of 6 or 12. It should feel equal to us. It should feel comfortable for us. Of course, he knows that it's not. That's why he wrote it. To force us to deal with this and learn how to make something uncomfortable comfortable through learning and repetition. So far, the two hands are still unified in terms of their rhythmic division. The held notes coincide in both hands, so if the right hand is playing a group of 5, the left is also playing a group of 5. After this opening, Ligeti expands the rhythmic complexity by asking the pianist to play different size groups in each hand simultaneously. This leads to very serious problems. Let's take the right hand for a moment. We have our groups of 6 and then 5. Then, watch what happens and see if you can figure out what is going on. Ligeti goes from groups of 6 to 5 to 4 to 3. 6, 5, 4, 3. He adds in a group of 4 at the end to close it off. Here's the whole thing. See if you can hear the groups change, and listen carefully for the last group of 4 near the end. Now, if the two hands were unified rhythmically, then this would be relatively easy to hear. But Ligeti asks the left hand to do something entirely different. The left starts out coinciding with the right. Groups of 6, then 5, then 4, then 3. But then he gives the left hand 4-note groups earlier than the right. Here it is in full. The groups of 4 come early. What this means is that in the last 2 bars, the right hand is playing groups of 3, and the left hand is playing groups of 4. The last group of 4 in the right hand coincides with the left hand, almost like the two hands are coming back into synchronization with each other. Now, if we play it at full tempo, we get a very strange and unique rhythmic effect. We can hear both regular sets of rhythms, but we can't find anything to tap our feet to. We almost have to listen to one or the other, but both at the same time confuse our brains. This is the second main point that Ligeti is making in this etude regarding rhythm. Not only is rhythm flexible, but we don't necessarily have to have the same rhythm in both hands at the same time. This addresses the common rhythmic style that underpins music from the Renaissance until the 20th century, that the melody and harmony are linked rhythmically. This is not to say that we don't have examples in music where the rhythm of the melody and harmony are not in sync. One could argue that the most elementary version of rubato in a melody provides this exception. But we still have regular bars that separate and organize the music. We have structure that relies upon harmonic events that require the melody and harmony to be in sync in order to work. Even if the timing is pulled apart entirely, like the free bars of music found in Beethoven or Liszt, the total structure of the piece is still communicated to the audience through a unification of harmony and rhythm. With this piece of Ligeti, each hand is doing its own thing. and climaxes occur sometimes in unison and sometimes not. The bar line has no meaning other than to help visually organize the rhythms on the page. One rhythm in the right hand can end after a new bar has begun, while a rhythm in the left hand finishes before the end of the previous bar. Ligeti relishes in providing us situations that cause the listener to hear rhythms that go in and out of phase with each other. The first example is the simplest one that we just saw. Let's have a look at another out-of-phase section, which is slightly more complex and certainly more interesting sonically. At the first main climax, Ligeti has us holding low notes using the sostenuto pedal while playing the continuous 16th notes in the uppermost register of the piano. The build-up to this climax has the right hand playing in groups of 7 and the left playing in groups of 5 and 4 alternating. Here's the right hand in 7. And here's the left playing groups of 5 and 4 alternating. Together, they're quite disconcerting indeed. Now, at this point, the groups start to disintegrate and finally disappear, setting the stage for a kind of repetition of the opening rhythmic style, where we start again with no groups, then regular groups, and then groups in phase. Now, I'm not just pointing this out because it sounds cool. This is the kind of rhythmic effect that you have to listen out for specifically when dealing with music in which rhythmic complexity is a vector of expression. Consider traditional classical music. A regular pulse allows us to create rubato, which is very important to any melodic music in terms of expression. Without a regular pulse to compare the melody to, we won't know when the melody is taking time. If we can't distinguish between the melody playing normally and the melody taking time, then the expression and meaning of taking time disappears entirely. We take time in music to emphasize a melodic element or a unique and interesting harmony, the purpose of which is usually to extract an emotional response from the audience. But if this ability is blocked or prevented, then we've lost a very important vector of communication. Ligeti blocks this in this piece, specifically by writing the whole work as a continuous stream of notes that should be equal to each other rhythmically. In order to make up for this lack of expression, Ligeti opens a new vector, that of our perception of irregular time. When we think of harmony, as an example, we might think of consonant and dissonant chords. When we're dealing with time and rhythm, we might think of the same things, consonant rhythm and dissonant rhythm. The issue for us is clarity. When the rhythms are out of phase with each other, but still regular enough to be discerned, it can sound consonant, because we can hear it clearly. Whereas when the rhythms are not only out of phase with each other, but also entirely unpredictable within themselves, we could think of these as dissonant, due to their complexity. It's one approach to listening to this kind of music, and when we see it from this perspective, all of a sudden the piece becomes far more interesting to listen to than before. I briefly mentioned harmony before, and this is another important vector that Ligeti blocks. We have no harmony in this piece, The right hand plays only notes from the whole tone scale starting on B, and the left hand plays only notes from the whole tone scale starting on C. In other words, the two hands will never play the same physical notes on the keyboard. Already, we could say that there is no tonality in this piece. But Ligeti goes further. He treats the notes solely based on their register and range. Where we might be looking for a melody, he is simply thinking, I'm going up, or I'm going down. This is an alien way of listening to music for many of us. Our first instinct is to look for a melody that we can hum along to, and a rhythm that we can tap our feet to. This is also why, when a listener encounters this piece for the first time, it's likely they'll be at first confounded, and then frustrated by it. It's not giving them what they're looking for in music. But this is why I say that modern music requires a different perspective in terms of how we listen to it. If we observe and learn what kind of language the composer is using, then we can listen for the complexity of that language within. If, however, we apply the wrong language to a composer, then we'll miss out on everything. Consider how Ligeti ends the piece. In traditional classical music, the indicator of an end is a cadence of some kind. It's nearly universal. In this piece, however, since we have no tonality of any kind, how does Ligeti tell the audience that the piece is over or coming to a close? Well, since complex rhythm is his primary expressive tool in this piece, he makes the rhythm simpler and then slower, until he finally removes the beat entirely. Dynamics are his second real expressive tool. So he gets softer to a point where the rhythm and individual notes are no longer easily discernible. He actually ends the piece with the instruction to play so softly that the transition to the final rest is imperceptible. This means that you are playing under the resonance so softly that the piano gently rumbles and disappears off into the ether, so to speak, like the sound of a distant thunder as it dissipates. The end of the piece is the moment when there is no more sound being created. We don't need a big cadence to tell us that it's over. When you're communicating through rhythm and sound, you simply and gently remove both until nothing is left. And it's clear that this is the end. I think it's important that we also consider this piece from a different, perhaps opposite perspective. Imagine that you're a composer. If you wanted to write an etude that focused on complex rhythms going in and out of phase with each other, how would you do it? Well, the first thing you'd have to consider is, how do I make the rhythms clear to the listener, no matter how complex they are? The easiest way is to do what Ligeti does, first and foremost. Write a continuum of notes that are regular, to serve as a base and frame of reference. This way, any changes in rhythm will not be misunderstood by the audience to be caused by rubato or any other personal choice of the performer. So, that makes sense. Next, how can you be sure that the audience will not be distracted away from the rhythms by tonality, or a lack thereof? Once again, Ligeti has the perfect solution. Each hand plays notes on a separate whole tone scale, completely removing the possibility of tonality and accidental harmonic consonance and dissonance. The harmony and resulting tonality is perfectly neutral. Now, all the other vectors are used for expression and communication of the structure. Rhythm being number one, but also dynamics, articulation, and pitch range on the instrument. So, in some ways, this piece is very familiar in terms of how we listen to music, only that instead of harmony and melody being number one, rhythm is now number one. After all of this, I'd suggest that you go back and listen to this piece once again, as I played it at the beginning of the episode. Listen to changes of rhythm, the choices Ligeti makes in terms of when he makes rhythm complex and when he makes it simple, and how he matches or confronts this with his dynamic choices. Sometimes it's loud with complex rhythm. Sometimes it's very soft and complex. Sometimes it's simple and loud, and sometimes it's simple and soft. These are all elements that are varied in their complexity, and the constellation they create provides the expression in this piece. But it's not necessarily an emotional expression, although emotions can be generated from the observation of it. These are expressions of density or transparency, of complexity or simplicity, textures rather than melodies. So, that's it for this episode of Ask a Pianist. Until next time, keep practicing, and keep in mind that there are many different ways to perceive art, and composers always experiment with this idea. Imagine being a painter, and instead of me asking you to paint the colors that you see outside your window, I ask you to paint the shadows you see instead. Something to think about. Bye for now.